This is GitMinutes Episode 3, where we talk to Richard Schneeman about Git branches and workflows. GitMinutes is a show for proficient Git users featuring stories, discussions, ideas, demos, and other things useful for those using Git today. I'm your host, Thomas Ferris Nicolaisen. You can email me any feedback or comments that you may have to feedback@gitminutes.com. You can also follow the show on Twitter and Google+. All of this information is, of course, available on gitminutes.com. This episode is recorded on the 28th of March 2013, and the show notes are available on links.gitminutes.com/03. So I'm sitting here with Richard Schneeman on the line, also known as Schneems on the internet. He is an engineer at Heroku, a former Pro League StarCraft player. He is a contributor to Ruby on Rails, and he also teaches Rails at the University of Texas. And he's engaged to Ruby. Yes, really, that is the name of his fiancée. So, Richard, how are you doing today? Or maybe, should I call you Schneems, or is it Richard?
Whatever you prefer. Schneems works. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm very good myself. So,
all right.
Let's hear your story, and you can start anywhere you'd like. Back at university, or explain us how you got to where you are today.
Well, my earliest memory, I was sitting on my parents. No. So my background, I'm actually a mechanical engineer. I'm not a computer scientist. And sometime in the middle of university, I just said, I want to build things. I want to make a website. And I turned to one of my roommates who was a computer scientist at the time. And I was like, how do you build a web application? And he's like, you mean like HTML? And I was like, no. Like, Dig, because Dig was big at the time. And turns out that, originally Dig was built in Ruby on Rails. So I picked up Ruby on Rails and absolutely loved it. I would stay home on Friday nights instead of going out and just be coding. And I'd be like, hey, look everybody, look what I did. I can click this link and increment a counter in a database, and everybody'd be like, go home, you're drunk. So I eventually graduated from school, got a mechanical engineering job, and in the middle of that decided that I wanted to get better at Rails, get better at more in depth of it. And the best way I knew how to do that was actually by teaching. So I've always thought that you learn something a lot better by teaching it. And Rails 3 was coming out, so I decided to get involved with the University of Texas and start teaching Ruby on Rails. Through that, I kind of got the attention of some people. Apparently there's not a lot of Rails programmers in the world. So they said, hey, that thing you're doing for free in your free time, how would you love to get paid to do it? And so I ended up working for Gowalla. It was a startup. They competed with Foursquare, and then they got bought by Facebook, and I decided I'd like to go work for Heroku, and now here I am.
So you started at working at Heroku, and what do you do there exactly?
So right now I work on the Ruby task force. So that means everything that happens after you do git push Heroku master. The kind of gears spin, and they install Ruby, install Rails. So that all of that is part of our build pack. I work on that along with Terrence Lee, and together we tackle various issues, add documentation, do community support, that kind of things. And Heroku is also gracious enough to allow me to go to conferences. I just got back from Uruguay, which was pretty excellent.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So going back a little bit, when did you start using Git?
I actually think I started using Git about the first time I started deploying to some of the platform as a service. I was always a sole developer. I was involved in some other communities, but I couldn't get anybody to program with me. I actually remember very distinctly I asked somebody a question once at a Atlanta Ruby users group, and they were like, like I'm not gonna bother wasting the time like helping you. Like it's too hard or something like that. And it's kind of funny because later on they came back and they messaged me on Facebook and they were like, "Hey, would you like a job at the company I'm working for?" So it's always a good feeling. But so yeah, originally it was the likes of Heroku and Morph, mor.ph. I don't know if they're still in business. And it took me a really long time to get version control because I was a sole developer. I didn't have to deal with like merges or anything like that, or like having multiple people working on the same things. So it was definitely a mental challenge. And one of the things that actually helped me kind of be more interested in version control was when I was living in Atlanta. My computer got stolen twice as I was building my first Rails website, and I didn't have, believe it or not, I didn't have an outside backup of the website either time. I lost months each time it happened. And then after that, like I got an external hard drive and like had, like locked that up to like a table, and then, had a time capsule syncing back and forth. And for a while, I actually kind of used time capsule like a Git repository, because I would be like, oh man, I changed something and then like saved the file. Like what was that thing that I changed? And I would like go back like a day, and it was horrible. That's
a pretty good reason to use source control, that your computer can get stolen.
Yes, absolutely. Right now I've got like everything either in Dropbox or like GitHub. So I'm, and Backblaze just for good measure. But
yeah. So you said it was really hard to grasp the mental model of Git, and you also teach when you teach at the university. Do you also teach the students how to use Git?
Mm-hmm. So I do spend a little bit of time on Git, not a ton. If I had. I've only taught shortened semesters. So if I was to teach a perhaps longer semester, I'd love to do some more exercises that involved multiple people working on the same repository where there were different roles per person. Say you're gonna build user authentication, and you're gonna build like the checkout flow, and you're gonna build like the welcome screens or something like that. Because I think Git is really something that you need to use in a team in order to truly understand it. Somebody can try to explain it to you. There's some really good stuff that Code School has put out there that will like walk you through Git in the browser. You can watch one of my videos where I try to explain it. I'm like, it's like, yeah, Back to the Future and Time Capsule. But it's kind of one of those. Like on one hand, it's really hard to understand, and on the other hand, it's really easy to understand because as a non-developer, these kind of version control systems are everywhere and everywhere in our lives. Like Microsoft Word, I still remember like I'd be writing a paper and I'd lose an entire night of work because I would forget to press, the little save button, and my computer would just crash arbitrarily on like Windows 3.1 or something like that. And it was devastating. And the first time they had like the auto save, that was like amazing. And then like the next evolution was like, oh man, it auto saved, but it auto saved when I was trying out deleting all of everything. And so, now it does like snapshots, these different auto saves, and you can actually kind of compare different views and, we're seeing more features like that in just more common everyday applications. So like it's easy to make the parallels with some of those, but I am kind of a firm believer of, to truly understand something, you kind of need to play with it and kind of just use it really.
Yeah, I think that personally that's a reason why some people don't really they don't really ever get the big point of Git, because they keep on using it like in an old fashioned way, and they don't really take advantage of the branches and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wanted to ask you was if you have any idea, you're being involved in the Ruby and the Rails community, and I think that they were pretty early, like one of the big projects outside of the Linux kernel and Git itself that were famous for using Git or kind of made Git famous in kind of the big developer community. Do you have any idea how Git grew so popular there?
Well, my history might be a little fuzzy, but everybody was using, when I first started, everybody was using RubyForge, or RubyForge or SourceForge. I kind of get one of those. Everybody was using a Forge, and at one point in time, I went to a developer meeting, and everybody was saying, "Man, Subversion, like forget that, like Git's the new hot thing." So I don't know. I really don't know too much of the individual history with that. I do think actually one of the really big things to encourage Git usage was GitHub. It gave people a little bit of a more sane model, like people who had been using Subversion or whatever, Perforce or any of those for a long time. They'd be like, oh yeah, obviously you have like one repository everybody checks in and out of, and like they hear about Git and it's like distributed version control. Like that's insane. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like why would I ever want to do that? And then you can kind of like show them GitHub, and you're like, oh yeah, here's your like your master copy that everybody syncs off of. And like one of the reasons I think Ruby really picked up Git relatively quickly is that one of the phrases is that we like to say is that Mats treats you like a grown-up developer, and in Ruby you can basically do anything you want. If you want to shoot yourself in the foot, you can really shoot yourself in the foot, but like all of that power that gives all of that danger, I guess, gives us a lot more power. And if you're a responsible developer, you can really, really, really leverage that. And Git is kind of the same way, where sure, it's like this distributed, scary, I don't understand how things kind of work and are set up. And like, if you just say, okay, no, it's fine. If I have a question, I'll like Google it. I'll just like keep everything on, one central repo, then, it really fits well with the kind of Ruby and Rails development mindset.
And I don't suppose you have any idea about like what were the Ruby guys doing before Git? Maybe they were using Subversion as well.
Yeah, it was mostly Subversion.
Yeah, because I wonder back then, were they already doing this kind of feature branching technique, which is so popular now with Git and GitHub?
So I'm actually kind of lucky enough when I say I didn't understand source control. I was lucky enough to not understand source control until Git was popular. So Git is the first source control I can say I really, really understand. And luckily enough, it was like the right one. When I picked Rails, there were a billion competing frameworks, and I kind of picked the right one. I'm very happy that it's still going with Ruby. But
did you have to learn Subversion later after you learned Git?
No, I will. One of the interesting things is like there are some Subversion, like relatively large Subversion projects in the community, but most of them are still hosted on GitHub, and they have a like Git to Subversion like converter kind of thing going on in the background, which is kind of interesting. And from my understanding, the branch, like it was possible to do these kind of like feature branches and like merge in stuff in Subversion, but like if you did it wrong, you just lost all of your work basically. And it was kind of this nightmare scenario. But I never had the pleasure of having to do that with a team. So,
wow, you were lucky. No,
absolutely.
I mean, Subversion has, they claim, or you theoretically have the feature of like being able to track merges. They do like some kind of merge tracking, but in a way, every time you make a merge in Subversion, it's basically like a merge squash, and you kind of toss away the entire history of the branch in a way. So. And of course, it's also horrible because it doesn't do any kind of rename tracking for you. And if there's been any renames at all, it just gets really, really ugly.
Yeah, I've heard. heard of version control engineers, just like one guy dedicated to like these, spending an entire day on like these really complicated merges and whatnot.
So coming back to Git again, you probably use a kind of GitHub style model where you work very pull request based. Is that the case?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I really started enjoying that after dealing with a team when I started at Gowalla. We all worked in the same office except for one developer, but we kind of treated it as though we were all remote. You would just go in whenever and you just sit down at your desk and put your headphones on. And if you needed to talk to the guy next to you, you'd send him an IM. And like it was kind of bizarre when I first got in there, and we picked up a pull request system pretty early on, after some people just merged some stuff into master, and like it broke some things, and then like it was just kind of this like, all right, we like you would do that on a Friday, and then people would be like freaking out and not knowing understanding the code that went in, or like, why is this code there? And you had a really low bus factor. So like nobody like I would individually be working on my own project, and somebody else would be working on theirs, and I would understand my code and they would understand theirs. And so when pull requests really became kind of popular on GitHub, we quickly moved to that just as a, if nothing else, code visibility thing. Hey, this is what I'm working on. And we said, all right, in order to get anything merged, we have to have someone else say, yes, if nothing else, I've looked over this code. And it also worked really well with our asynchronous workflows, where, sure, I want to ship some code at 8 at night and everybody else is, at home doing whatever. They can kind of just get to it whenever, and I don't have to synchronously take their time and like wait and sit down. I don't have to like print out all of my code and have them go over it with a highlighter, that kind of a thing. So I've really, really enjoyed it. And the more I've gotten into open source, the more I've like embraced this model of asynchronous work. Back at Gowalla, we didn't really do a lot of code improvements in the pull requests. We might say like, okay, hey, you're doing something really dangerous here. You might want to watch out, or like, oh, you have a typo or whatever, something along those lines. But in open source, especially with contributing to a big project like Rails, right now I'm on the Rails issue team, so I can actually go in and like help triage and close people's issues. It's such a large code base that you can't just contribute the first bit of code that works. If your code is weird, if it's like you have some crazy white space going on, if you're there's an obvious coding convention in the rest of the file and you're doing your own thing, like it just makes it a little bit harder to read. And you have to realize like, okay, this one person is contributing a piece of code, and then you might never, ever, ever see them again for the rest of the project. So, as soon as I say, thumbs up +1, it is no longer their code, and it is my code, and I have to understand it and maintain it. And that's something I've actually kind of really enjoyed is getting to look at different people's code, and the different ways in which they approach problems, and even just somebody saying, hey, here's a problem and I wrote a fix for it, and I'll open it up and I'll be like, oh man, I know nothing about Active Record or Action Mailer or whatever. And just being able to look at their pull requests and it's kind of a challenge. It's like, okay, well, I'll look at their tests and see if I can understand their problem. And if not, I'll ask them questions, and at the end of the day, like I walk away with a little bit more knowledge about that piece of the ecosystem and the piece of the code without actually having to have done that work myself. I'll understand how things fit in a little bit better.
That's really interesting. That is kind of like a learning model. I wanted to ask, like you said that you were working in a co-located team, right?
Yes.
And my kind of experience is that when I'm working with co-located team and I kind of ask, should we do more like a pull request model and have, incorporate code review? Mm-hmm. And the usual reasoning is that, no, since we are co-located, let's just, stay as fast as we can and, just do synchronous review and then commit and merge the master right away. And the belief is typically that doing asynchronous reviews will slow us down because it'll kind of, they think it'll take longer for each piece of code to get into master. Mm-hmm. Do you have an opinion about that? Is it kind of slower but more quality rich, or is it actually faster to work with pull requests?
I think it varies on the team and the type of work you're doing tremendously. What most of us were so outside of, it was a relatively small team, relatively large code base, and we were constantly under national. This article is coming out from the New York Times on Sunday or something, or the Apple App Store wants to feature us on like Wednesday, and really get these features out, and so like I do kind of believe in a bit of a programmer zone, and like you're there and you like really understand the problem and like you understand everything that's going on, and like the code it's like the Matrix where you're like, I don't even see the code anymore, just like brunette or like and then somebody comes and taps you on their shoulder and they're like, hey, can you look at this thing that I've been staring at for like the last 5 days and I understand totally and you've never seen before in your life. And hopefully it's not 5 days, hopefully it's smaller commits than that, and they're just like, whoa like you just totally broke my flow. So I do think there is a small component of that. And like, if you're working closely with someone anyway, like we didn't always use pull requests. Sometimes you just tap somebody on the shoulder and be like, hey, come, like look at what I'm doing. This needs to go in now. I've got I just need a sanity check. And sure, people would occasionally just go cowboy and like push the code to master. And later on, if it broke anything, then you get in huge trouble. It's one of the testing paradigms, I guess, is some people say testing takes longer, and other people will argue that, you can only go as fast as you can go, I'm totally butchering this. It's like only go as fast as safely or something along those lines. Yeah. And so, if I really needed something in, it just goes in. And, at having even just, I guess, one remote person, sure, we were a co-located team, but we did have one remote person. And eventually we even brought them in house, but we still kept that culture. And it was just nice because like I actually live in Austin, Texas, and it's a beautiful, wonderful city. And for some reason, there's horrible traffic at just the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And I live, the offices were downtown, and I could work from home in the morning, and it wasn't too much different for me working in the office. I would wait for traffic to pass up, and then I'd go into the office. And even though we weren't a remote team, it still really worked out. And then with Heroku, we do it's almost entirely pull request based and asynchronous. And most of the code that we deal with at Heroku is very much focused on quality, maintainability, reliability. When you write a piece of code and you say, oh, this might be touching hundreds of thousands or millions of live running applications. Before, when I was working for Goala, I was like, oh man, like we've got millions of users. Like this is great. And like any one day, like hundreds of thousands of them might log in. And I'm like, oh wow, like these millions of applications might have millions of users, like it's kind of a different order of magnitude. And it's definitely one of those things that I do think it produces a higher quality of code. And it's also one of those things where even the best quality code in the world is still like not good enough. So anything you can do to improve the quality of your code is worth at least looking into.
It's really interesting. I've been discussing this with a buddy of mine. He works, kind of 100% remotely or from home. And we've been, discussing back and forth with this, async, collaboration in the team. And it's funny that you have, the experience from like a real company and, because a lot of people think that, okay, this is fine for open source projects, where they have, all these contributions coming from 100 different directions. But, for a real company where we're in the office, that doesn't work. That only slows us down. But I think we kind of nailed that. It can actually speed you up in the long term, because of the quality increase. My personal little, question, being an old, extreme programmer method fan, is how does this asynchronous code review style work compared to pair programming? Do you have any opinions about that?
We don't do a ton of pairing at Heroku. That being said, I mentioned Terrence Lee. He works on the build pack. I just went over to he also happens to live in Austin. Both of us are remote, but we live in Austin. So like I just went and hung out at his house, and like we nailed down a feature, pair style side by side, and it was great, and it felt really good. And that was the right thing to do for that problem. I think pairing excels whenever you're dealing with either really, really, really hard problems that almost like can't fit in one person's brain, or just like really, problems in which you almost kind of like need some motivation, or just like this really gnarly, evil problem. And then you have somebody to kind of keep you on track, and it's almost, an exercise of like coding with a person instead of coding the solution. And I really like both of those. Though sometimes I just need to work on a feature that I understand really well, and somebody else in the company is also working on their feature that they need to understand really well, and the pull request kind of it works out, I'd say. Also, by having a pull request model, one of the nice things is fun fact. GitHub actually had to increase the number of maximum allowed repos in GitHub because of Heroku. We had so many repositories, because Heroku is very much itself is distributed. Heroku.com, toolbelt.com, blog.heroku.com. These are all entirely different applications. And so we just have a ton of repos. A ton of them are private. A ton of them are public. And so GitHub had to increase the number of repos for us. Cool. But by having that, if I see a problem with the blog, or I see a problem with, a typo or something, in one case, we just actually came out with this, piece of software called Log to Viz, which helps you visualize your Heroku usage and your memory consumption. Very, very cool piece of software. And at one point in time, I saw a bug in it, and I just pulled it and followed the README, got it working, made the code changes, made a pull request, and then, I needed it kind of merged in pretty quick. And so I just messaged somebody in Campfire, and they got it in, versus if I was in the office and I was looking to pair on that feature, then you still have to do this synchronous bit where you say, okay, when do you have time? When do you have time? So I like both. I don't think it's a always do one or always do the other. And that's the worst answer to give ever.
No, I think it's fine, because I think it sounds like the right answer.
All right. That's the type of answers I like. Right.
Yeah, but use the right technique for the job kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's interesting to hear that you kind of have the whole open source model inside your company again, that you can kind of go and poke about in your other in the other teams' services and code bases, and also contribute out there where you kind of feel like it, and not only where you're ordered to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You'll be sitting. I go to San Francisco frequently, and like I'll be having dinner with engineers, and I'll be like, "Oh, hey, you wrote this one interface or this one feature or something." Like, man, I'd really love it to do blank blank, and they'll kind of just look at you and be like, "Well, you have access to the source code."
Do
So
it yourself.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? If you're used to just everybody likes to be a critic, and everybody likes to know how to do everything. And like, in the open source community, like if you don't like something, like, fork it, submit a pull request. That's how it's done. So yeah, we definitely embrace that as internally in the company.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you if you're familiar with the other so-called, branching models. There is, the big famous NV model or whatever it's called, Git flow. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
So I tried Gitflow for a while. Like I installed the brew, brew install Gitflow or something along those lines, and it was just too heavy-handed for me. It was just too much maintenance work to kind of keep everything. Like, it was just a bunch of balls that I had to constantly be juggling in the air. And maybe I didn't stick with it long enough. But so I guess that model is all about you have like a main branch, and then you have like your hotfix branch, and then you have like all of your individual feature branches, and this, you're constantly like rebasing everything and or merging in everything. And I just prefer the simplicity of a master branch and then a feature branch. Yeah. I do all of my branches under like Schneems / whatever, which is really convenient. So then I can just always search for like Schneems, and even if there's 100 feature branches, like I just see mine. And I can definitely understand an area in which you could say
would work. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I think the bigger the project you're working on, the more that would make sense. Like like having the hotfix branch would just be, really, really nice. But I would almost challenge and say that if you are to that point, it's almost time to try and break up your product in, it's kind of like the famous catch-all solution. It's like, oh, of course, service-oriented architecture, just break everything up into services. Yeah. And I mean, it's a lot easier said than done, but, at that point in time, if you have 30 or 40 or 100 or what, however many developers, like all working on literally the exact same code base, like finding some way to break up the areas of responsibility, and even, even things like Rails was, just one giant repo, and like now it's like switched to this, like all of these individual gems, and like even though the one repo still has Action Mailer and like Active Record and all of these, they're all individually released, and they all have their separate changelog, and it's a little bit easier to wrap your head around when you're working on them. I
do kind of like using the Gitflow model as an example of how you can do it. Like a lot of people who are new to Git, and they're kind of just questioning around. So how do you use these branches and stuff like that? And I like just showing Gitflow because it has very nice illustrations of how you can do it.
Absolutely.
If you're going for the enterprisey way of doing it. But yeah, I'm absolutely all for, just keeping it simple.
I'd also agree that it's like just saying, oh, just use feature branches if you've never used a feature branch makes no sense. So I totally agree.
And the last kind of model I wanted to discuss is what you could call the subversion convert model, where we always do everything in one branch or master, and all the things that get merged in have to be either squashed or rebased first, so that there are no merge commits. Kind of like the linear history model. Have you ever seen people who enforce that just because they get confused by merge commits?
Not really. Like I have worked on a bunch of projects where where people prefer rebasing. But it's normally it's because of something like a feature branch type scenario, never because everybody's been like on top of master. And I will say, like, actually on Rails for pull requests, we don't generally accept multiple commits per pull request. We do kind of enforce this. You're going to completely rewrite your history and turn it all into one commit. But that's mostly just a maintenance thing, where if it goes in and then later we say, oh man, that commit caused a bug, or that feature, we don't actually want that feature, then we can just rip it out. And it's one command, and like you can, it's great. You can go to the change log, and then you can do a git blame in the change log and find the commit, the exact commit, and then just it's all together and all packaged really neatly. But so yeah, I don't have a ton of experience with the just like only on master model.
That's really interesting, because I thought that I'm not familiar with the version control strategy of Rails or the Rails project, but I thought that these kind of typical GitHub projects, that they have these each change or in feature that they are kind of marked in the main history as a merge commit. And single smaller commits that happen on a branch, they are just, they're there if you want to go and see what actually this merge commit, kind of included, but otherwise, but, certainly at my own company where we work, we don't like too many merge commits, because they are still, we've been working with subversion so long that the too many merge commits can start to confuse us. Because we're not so good at thinking in concurrency and version control, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to have that choice, I guess, as well.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things I saw on your blog that was really interesting was this post about a new feature that you added to the Rails project, and at the top of the pull request, there was a huge animated GIF that was like a screencast and showed off this really cool new feature. Can you tell us a bit about how that came about, and where you got the idea, and what you did there?
So the feature I was working on, I tried describing it to several people, and the description of it, people were like, I guess that's kind of interesting. And then I showed it to some people, and they were like, wow, that's really cool. And what the feature was, I've added to Rails 4 the ability to see your routes inside of the browser. So you don't have to run rake routes anymore. It comes up instantaneously. It's pretty awesome. You should check out the Rails 4 beta. And one of the things I wanted to do was give the people the ability to enter in a path and see what routes match to that path. And I like, as I'm describing this to you right now, it's kind of like, I guess that's maybe interesting. You can go to, I think it's issue number 9001 and actually check it out. github.com/rails/issues/9001. And go ahead.
Yeah, we'll have a link to it in the show notes, which will be at links.gitminutes.com/03. So,
all right,
please continue.
And so sometimes the best way to distribute information is visually, and so people will add photos into their pull requests in order to say, okay, here's I'm making a style change. Here's the style change. And this was actually kind of a behavior change, and doing something that you previously couldn't do before. I'm also a big believer of trying to help out your open source maintainers as much as humanly possible. And, I might work for a week on a new feature or something in Rails or Rescue or Node or whatever open source project I'm hacking on at the time, and then I submit that issue, and I realize that the open source maintainer is probably like just had dinner, and they're just like casually checking their email, and they're like, what's going on? And they've gotten like 20 other emails that day if it's a really popular project. And like I maintain a couple of gems, like Sextant and it's and Wicked. And sometimes people will just open these like issues, and it'll just be the title only, and like no description and a ton of code, and you're just like you spend all of this time writing all of this code, and I'm just gonna close it because I don't understand it. And then now we kind of like got off on the wrong foot, and you have to backpedal and like go back and explain it to me. And to give somebody the magic of that feature, like right at their fingertips, and just really, really do a good job of explaining it. It's projects like Rails, there's so many lines of code, it's impossible to know all of them. Like you can't just we have computers to parse code and run code for us. We kind of have to summarize and actually almost sell your code and fight for your features. And if your feature can't stand up on its own two legs, if it can't say, oh, this is what my feature does and this is why we should have it, if people don't understand that well enough and say, yes, I love it, I want it, then it's just not going in. So I made up a little screencast of it, and I shared it with some people, and they were like, man, this would be like, this is amazing, I love this. And I was like, oh, how, like, I would love to embed a YouTube video in GitHub. And I was like, oh, I can't though. And like, I talked to some of the GitHub guys, and I was like, can I, please do this? And they were like, oh, it's on, it's on a board somewhere in like Trello or like GitHub issues or something. And I'm like, oh, okay, that means it's not coming out. Then I got the idea, and I had been playing around with some like these GIFs, and like I just converted it to a GIF and like threw it in there, and like people went crazy about it. I had just assumed that, like, I don't know, like I just thought it was a perfectly normal thing to do at the time, and then everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like amazing!" And so I decided to actually write a blog post about like how I did that. So it was a ton of fun. Highly recommend it. Yeah, GIFs in your pull requests.
It's really cool when you look at that issue. There's like a whole array of those thumbs up emoticons from GitHub and hearts and whatever.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I spotted in between there, and it probably relates to the discussion we were having earlier on, is that I think it was Steve Klabnik wrote, can't be auto-merged. And then you wrote, I wish GitHub would make the merged ability of a pull request public info.
Yes.
Can you explain what that means?
If I manually try to merge something, then if I git pull a branch, or I do git merge, and then whatever my feature branch into master, it'll complain, and it will say, here's why you can't merge it, and here's the, here's your merge flags, basically. So really, really, really frequently inside of large projects, especially Rails, you have to have something like a change log to keep track of all these different changes. And frequently, somebody will submit a pull request, and they will say, "Yes, I love it. This should go in, but we can't automatically merge it via GitHub." And you don't know why. You don't know if it's did somebody change actually a crucial piece, a crucial core of the code that I'm working in? 99% of the time, it's just somebody added a new change log, and there's a merge conflict in the change log, and it's the most frustrating thing ever. And it's one of those things where if I could go in and I could, GitHub has this great Ace editor, and like I can just like modify things like in place in the browser. Like it would just be so insanely simple. Or even this is actually kind of a big thorn in my side now as a Rails issue team member, where we have this kind of back and forth dance where we ask somebody to rebase, and then we maybe it takes them a while to rebase, and then by the time they've done it and they've gotten back to us and we're ready to merge it in, then they have to rebase again, all just because of the change log. So I would love to find a good solution for this for large projects. And it's something that I've kind of been like talking to anybody who will listen to me about it. And I don't necessarily know what the solution looks like. I've talked about doing crazy things with like bots that will automatically like do things for you, and like committing things to temporary files, and like pulling things out of like the pull request description, and nothing really seems to resonate with any of the other team members. So that's kind of what I was talking about with that comment with Steve.
That's really interesting, because it's kind of the what pops into a lot of people's head is when they see this, merge pull request model, and also in are you familiar with Garrett code review?
Mm-hmm. Well, wait.
Also in that model, you kind of always people ask, so what if it gets merged too late, and it doesn't the pull request doesn't fit anymore? Then you kind of have to go back and rebase it, and that could cycle back and forth forever. So it's a really interesting problem, and if they would find some kind of solution for it, that would be really cool too.
Yeah, and actually to back up, I think at the time what I was only talking about is GitHub. I don't know if it'll tell you if you're contributing to a repo you don't have access to. I don't think it'll tell you if you can merge it or not.
Okay.
I think that's actually what I was talking about. But I also care really deeply about this whole changelog thing that I just spent 5 minutes talking about.
Isn't it also possible for the people to, like, if I'm the project maintainer and I get a pull request, and the master has already moved forward, but I try merging and then it fails. And what I can do then as the maintainer is that I can I can do the merge locally on my own computer and kind of add your pull request as a remote branch, and then pull that remote branch down and merge that one. So is that possible as well? I mean, is it just that people are so comfortable with just doing everything in the GitHub interface that they want to do it that way?
Actually, when I was at RubyConf Uruguay, Raphael, one of the core contributors, and he's really, really active on the issues, was actually saying that exactly has been what he's been doing on a lot of those. That he's, right now, the number of issues as we're kind of coming to the Rails 4 release, getting a little closer and closer, the number of issues keeps growing and growing. And some of these features you want to say, okay, we really want this in, and I can no longer wait on you to do this, myself. And, if you're in the kind of the open source model, hopefully if you're in the same company, like you can just tap on somebody's shoulder and be like, yo, can you like work on this? But like people go on vacation and like other things. So pulling it in locally and fixing that merge conflict is definitely an option. But if we're looking at the open source model as opposed to the in-house model, the inner company model, it's an extra burden on those maintainers. If you only have 6 people who are looking at pull requests and doing these merges, and you have 500 issues, would you rather somebody spend 5 minutes fixing a merge conflict, or would you rather have them spend 5 minutes looking at another another issue and a half, or something along those lines?
I like the idea that it's the choice of the maintainer if he can kind of push the effort and the work of resolving the merge conflicts, that he can kind of push those back on the contributor instead. That scales much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, it helps you learn a little bit about version control. Like if the first time I had ever been asked to do that was for Rails, and they were like, "Hey, can you it was just like squash and rebase," and I was like, "I'm gonna go Google that. Like, what exactly are you asking me to do?" And I was like, "Oh, really? Like, you want me to rewrite history?" Like, I thought that was like a really bad thing in version control, and it's like, oh, it's only a bad thing if like you're on a branch where somebody else is like actually working. So when you have this kind of feature branch model and everybody's like in your own happy little ecosystem bubble, like it's actually pretty safe and can end up making slightly more readable commits. So I'm been a fan of it.
Cool. So I think we're about to run close to being out of time. Are there any things or projects or pages that you would like to promote before we go?
Absolutely. I have a project called Code Triage, and one of the kind of general themes that I've had on the show, if you didn't catch it, was Rails issues and the inability of just a few people to kind of like deal with this massive amount of issues. So a lot of people, they come to me and they say, I really want to get involved in open source, or like, I don't know where, I don't know how. And like the common answer is like, oh, join the mailing list. Right. And yeah, like people, anyway, that is not a foolproof solution, but like people, as they're just getting started, it's like, oh, it's the holy grail to, like get a commit into Rails, or like, I really want to help out and I love this project. And like, I want to invest in I'm going to be using Rails for a while. So like, if I'm investing in my future, I'm investing in everyone's future. I'm like helping the ecosystem. I'm giving back, all of these things. And it's just like, the question is like, how? So I originally wrote this little program that sends me one GitHub issue a day, just to my email. I wrote it for it was originally a rescue demo, and then it just got way too complicated. And, so yeah, it just sent me one issue a day, and I was like, oh wow, this is great. And like, I just kept on getting that issue, and it was like this one bite-sized chunk. I would look into it, and if it was a pull request, I'd like check out the code, and if it was a bug report, I'd like try to verify the bug report. And I just learned a lot about this project. And then like I got really excited about it and decided to just open it up and allow it to be used by anyone. So now you can go to codetriage.com, sign up for any GitHub repo, any open source GitHub repo, and just you get one issue in your inbox per day. It's that simple. The really simple concept, but the results are pretty powerful. It kind of crowdsources the contributions and the review, and then anytime you say like, oh, there's a big thing where Rails, I want to say like 3.2.13 came out, and people were like, oh no, it's slow, and oh no, like there's these regressions, and people are like really upset. And it's like, well, this was an open public decision. Like, where were you when we like merged that in, or where were you like when we had the release candidate? And people tend to have this model of like open source. Oh, there's millions of people just like poring over every line of code. And because of that, they might not as much. And just breaking that up into a bite-sized chunk really helps. So codetriage.com.
Cool. Do you have any metrics on how many issues you or Code Triage has fixed so far?
I could a lot.
That's cool.
We're looking at right now. I don't know I know how many issues we send out. I'm hitting GitHub's API pretty hard with this. I would have to hit it like way harder to actually do the are people who are getting the issues how effective is each one being. But I will say, like, since I've started it, and it might be the Code Triage or maybe not, but like I've definitely noticed more just random one-time activity inside of the Rails issues than I would have otherwise. Even if you don't contribute, like you're plus oneing your knowledge of the ecosystem.
That's really cool. Okay, go on to any other links you want to promote before we finish? Heroku.com.
If you haven't heard of it, it's this great new way to run your web apps. My own personal blog, Schneems.com. It's way better if you put a link than if I spell it. My last name's Schneeman, which is German for snowman. It's not a big deal for people in like anybody in like EU is like, oh yeah, awesome name. Anybody in like North America is like, what did you just say? Like, what did you call me? And I've got about 40 hours of intro to Rails material, videos, lectures, exercises, quizzes on Schneems.com. It's also, I post interesting things there, like how to make GIFs and whatnot every once in a while. So check that out. And want to give a shout out to my favorite Git command. It is git config -e, which just brings up if you have your editor set, it will bring up your configuration of your remotes in your favorite editor. And since I work on so many projects inside of Heroku all of the time, I constantly run into this issue where I type in like git git pull upstream master or something like that, and it's like, oh, no remote upstream found, and like you can just go, you can open it, you can edit it, and like actually see where everything's pointing. So nice. Absolutely love it. Nice.
Okay, well, Richard, it's been a very interesting talk. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And that was the end of this episode. Once again, you can find the show notes on links.gitminutes.com/03. Get in touch, send me an email on feedback@gitminutes.com, or you can comment directly under the blog post for this episode. And you can, of course, get in touch via Twitter or Google+. You can follow us there to get notified of any new episodes. And of course, we have the appropriate RSS feeds for iTunes and whatever else is out there. Big thanks to danosongs.com for providing free music to the show. Until next time, thank you for listening.